Ever wondered which Titan build packs the most punch but remains unnoticed? I carefully crafted this Prismatic Arc build and I've been dominating Nightfalls, dungeons, and lost sectors ever since. Upon release of the final shape, and honestly even before then, Arc has been considered the worst subclass for Titans. I won't lie to you, it took a lot of testing, failed weapon loadouts, and hours of frustration before I found a strong build that finally clicked. Now that I have, I can't wait to share it with you all. So in this video, I'll cover all the prismatic aspects and facets, I'll give you my recommendations for strongest weapons, as well as discuss how to use this build optimally and master content. You're probably wondering, why aren't more players using this powerful Titan build? To be honest, there are not many strong, readily available arc weapons to handle champions. For example, in the current meta, rocket-assisted frame sidearms are reigning supreme in terms of ammo efficiency and packing a punch. Strand has the Call, which drops in the Pale Heart and is craftable. Solar has Aberrant Action, which drops from Echo's activities and is craftable as well. And then there's Indebted Kindness, with arc damage. This one is only available from the Warlord's Ruined Dungeon and is not craftable. Most casual players will not try to tackle dungeon encounters solo for a chance at dropping this weapon. And don't even get me started on arc swords. Moreover, Thunder Crash is simply Titan's worst super for the Prismatic subclass. In most cases, Twilight Arsenal would be the most damaging. It leaves enemies weakened, provides an overshield when coupled with Facet of Purpose, and has the lowest cooldown of all other supers. Blade Fury and Glacial Quake both do more damage as standalone abilities, while providing Woven Mail and Frost Armor respectively through the same facet. Even Hammer of Soul would provide us with Restoration. Thunder Crash, on the other hand, does the least damage out of all the options and only empowers us with Amplified. But I wouldn't consider this an arc build if we used another subclass's super, so we're taking it. At least we have ways of buffing our super to help compensate, one of those being Cuirass of the Falling Star, but I'll get into that a bit later. The key to dominating endgame content is assembling your prismatic loadout just right. As I mentioned earlier, Thunder Crash is our super of choice. Thruster for the extra mobility and low cooldown orb generation from the Reaper mod. Then we dip into a Void ability, Shield Throw. The overshield this ability provides after a successful hit is the only bonus durability we'll have besides Amplified with Galvanic Armor. It's one of the defensive pillars propping up this build. Pulse Grenade for the ability to jolt enemies. Drangar's Lash helps with crowd control and enables us to stun unstoppables if need be. Knockout is the other pillar keeping us alive. It provides sturdiness, which arc builds severely lack. Facet of Protection gives us more damage resistance when surrounded. Since we'll be amplified most of the time, it makes sense to take Facet of Sacrifice. Arc weapons will build up our Light Transcendence energy fairly quickly. Now, thanks to Sacrifice, our abilities will help us generate dark energy quicker. Facet of Courage imbues our arc abilities with extra damage if the enemy has a darkness debuff. This includes extra damage on Thunder Crash. From what we've gone over so far, Drangar's Lash is the only debuff we have, but I'll get to a more consistent Strand debuff when I get to talking about our weapons. As mentioned earlier, we need Jolt on our grenade for the extra damage buff, so we take Facet of Dominance. And last, Facet of Purpose is basically a staple on every Titan build. In this build specifically, it helps us stay amplified every time we pick up an Orb of Power. As for seasonal artifact perks, Anti-Barrier Pulse Rifle and Unstoppable Sidearm in the first column. The third option is up to you. In the second, we take Overcharged Armory, then either Logic Reductor or Winning Hand, depending on if you want to buff the Call or Corrasion if you're running the basic loadout. I'll explain what the basic weapon loadout is in a minute. Elemental Siphon for Strand Tangles, and Overload Sword in the third column. Okay, now the fourth column, the options become more prominent for the build. Blade Stamina for ammo refund on sword kills, Radiant Orbs for the 25% buff to weapons, and Galvanic Armor for the 30% damage reduction to incoming attacks. In the last column, Argent Blade boosts our sword damage when we have armor charges, and Shield Crush boosts our melee and grenade damage as well as energy regen. Okay, back to Cuirass of the Falling Star. It boosts Thunder Crash's damage by 100% and overshields us for 100 HP for 7 seconds, but scales up to 20 seconds the further we travel during the animation. The damage and overshield are strong, but the ability to traverse across areas and take out a champion or finish off a boss is severely undervalued. It shines even more when we get multiple uses out of it in the same activity, from maxing out our intelligence stat. For reference, we can get 4 uses of Thunder Crash in this week's Nightfall, Arcadian Valley, in a 12-minute run-through. Since I mentioned our intelligence stat, here's a quick look at how to distribute the others. Resilience, maxed out with intelligence. Then you should focus strength for more shield throws, and recovery after that. I mentioned earlier how we have methods to empower our super damage. If you followed along closely, then you already know that in total we have 3 approaches. The first is obviously from Cure S. The second is from jolting enemies right before our super. And the third is from Facet of Courage. You might think choosing an exotic that doesn't buff our weapon damage or allow us to spam abilities would force us to cover and pick enemies off from afar. And sure, we could play that way, but this build really shines when taking down packs of enemies with lightning fast precision strikes. The right weapons take this build from strong to absolutely dominant. Here, I need to break down our weapon loadouts into 2 categories, basic and best in slot. This build is capable of taking on all champion types through a combination of weapons and abilities, but you won't always have uptime on the necessary abilities, so we want to make sure our weapons are capable of handling all 3 types and that their ammo types are balanced. No double special ammo weapons here. No. Let's talk about the basic loadout first. No. We have the Call in our kinetic slot. I like to run it with Slice and Adrenaline Junkie. This is the other method for debuffing enemies that I mentioned earlier. This will proc Facet of Courage. And Junkie is just a fantastic damage buff that is easy to activate on rocket assisted sidearms. This weapon is easily attainable from the Pale Heart and is craftable. Plus, the origin trait increases our super energy on kills. You can't go wrong with this choice. The energy slot is filled by Couragean, the new Arc Pulse Rifle, farmable from failsafe seasonal activities. I like to take Eddy Current and Volt Shot, both being arc specific weapon perks by the way. Eddy Current increases reload speed and handling whenever we are amplified, which is basically all the time. Then, Volt Shot empowers our weapon to jolt enemies. As strong as that is, I feel that this weapon perk almost breaks the seasonal meta because it allows one weapon to handle 2 different champion types. This Pulse Rifle will handle Barrier and Overload champs, but I still think we can put a better weapon in this slot. I'll get to that in a minute. Lastly, we use Naz Redden, an adaptable frame arc sword in the power slot. You can focus this weapon from Banshee. He sells them on a regular basis. This sword in particular is powerful because it can roll with Relentless Strikes and Whirlwind Blade, basically the God Roll combo for DPSing bosses. Not to mention, this will stun any Overload champion in about 3 swings. We've covered all champion types with readily available weapons. We have given ourselves some pretty powerful perks in the process with minimal effort, and we did it all without needing a single exotic weapon. Not too shabby, but we can do better, especially in terms of moving around the map quickly with lightning fast precision. So let's get into what I consider to be the best in slot weapons for this Lightning God build. In the kinetic slot, I recommend we take Relentless. This powerful strand pulse rifle is farmable from the Prophecy dungeon. It has the same perk combo as the Call, but with much further range, higher stability, rounds per minute, and reload speed. Plus, its origin trait boosts our damage by 1.5 to 3% in the latter half of our magazine. This will effortlessly take care of barrier champions and apply the slice debuff to enemies. Indebted Kindness with Impulse Amplifier and Volt Shot is essential. Increased projectile velocity and reload speed are remarkable on this rocket sidearm, but Volt Shot is an MVP here. We're able to jolt enemies after getting a kill with this weapon, just like we could with Couragean. That means we continue to break the traditional restrictions on weapons, where one firearm cannot receive an elemental buff and still retain its seasonal artifact perk. We're now able to stun unstoppable champs with regular rounds and stun overload champs with a Volt Shot. That's pretty incredible. In fact, it gives me an idea for another build where my sword won't have to stun overload champions at all, but can focus on barriers instead. But I digress. The clip you see here is actually Brigand's Law because RNG hasn't been too kind to my Indebted Kindness perks. Even still, this rocket sidearm is next level. The only downside is that it is locked behind a dungeon. Warlord's Ruin. Luckily, Titans have a great build to farm this boss easily. I'll get back to that later. Okay, the power slot now. As I alluded to near the start of this video, Arc Swords are not readily available like they are for other classes. However, there is an exotic sword from year 1 that is perfect for this build, World Line 0. Fortunately for us, this one is accessible from the exotic archive at the tower. It does cost 1 exotic cipher, which are really scarce this season, and 125,000 glimmer. But with this sword in hand, our power fantasy of teleporting around the screen and slicing enemies with lightning attacks is now complete. Another awesome benefit is that teleporting a large distance allows us to stun overload champions that much easier. If you're a sword main like me, you know how embarrassing it is to run around chasing overloads like a game of keep away. No longer. The catalyst allows us to activate Tesseract slightly faster, so it's not really necessary to go out and farm it. I know, I'm asking a lot by recommending items that are very difficult to acquire for solo players. And if you want my honest opinion, I'd love to put Imminence in our loadout, which is a strand lightweight frame SMG, but it is only available from the Salvation's Edge raid. The extremely powerful raid-specific perk, Chaos Reshaped, is amazing. Being in combat for an extended period of time grants a periodic burst of healing, on top of the 20 to 35% damage buff. That's insane, but it's unrealistic for us solo players, so we'll just stick to grinding for Relentless and Indebted Kindness. That's enough work already. This build truly excels in endgame content, and I'm about to show you why. Even the basic weapon loadout runs through Master Nightfalls and Master Lost sectors with minimal issues, but switching to best in slot items will push you to soloing the same content more consistently and honestly more enjoyably with World Line Zero's Tesseract ability. The one thing you have to keep in mind is to save your class ability and grenade for boss DPS phase. You want to maximize your Thunder Crash damage and debuff the enemy since you'll land right next to them. Afterwards, you'll follow up with Tesseract and a shield throw if you've got it. The overshield will keep you alive as the boss retaliates. And speaking of surviving, don't forget to use your sword to guard incoming damage. Most people forget that this lightning blade has infinite guard as a perk. You can hold down the guard indefinitely to block incoming fire from adds. You definitely won't be as protected as a stronghold user, but it has saved my life more times than I can count, so it'll do the same for you. Besides Facet of Courage plus Super, your second strongest combo will be to kill an ad with Indebted Kindness, Bolt Shot and Overload Champion, and then Tesseract in to finish them off. Pulling off this technique leaves you feeling like a god, and has actually gotten me some praise from random Fire team members who didn't expect that level of lethality from my build. But earlier I mentioned that Titans have a build to farm Indebted Kindness from Warlord's Ruin. This build lets you take on Wrathful with ease, making it a breeze to safely farm powerful weapons and armor from the dungeon. So if you want an in-depth guide on what that build is, or if you want to see a walkthrough for taking on Wrathful from Warlord's Ruin, then click on one of these two videos and I promise you won't be disappointed.